With a single goal in mind, I've been able to climb a mountain, and it only took about 20 years of good life choices to get to this point. No matter how bad it gets, I can camp out in my house, living off of ramen noodles. This freedom will allow me to personally and professionally pursue what I'm interested in rather than just what makes ends meet. Today, I'd like to do something a little different on the show and talk with you about a major milestone that I accomplished. I want to just spend this show talking about my story of becoming debt-free before I turned 37 years old at the end of this month. And I really want to highlight the fact that it was not an overnight success, but took only a decade or two in the making to get to this point. Because I don't know about you, but I love learning the stories and lives of other people living a real messy life. And my hope is that one of you may find this story helpful on your financial journey, because truly, my own personal financial journey has set me up to be able to do some really cool things today from actions and seeds I planted 10 and 20 years ago. So I feel like I can't effectively teach on this show without you understanding my financial background, my financial journey. And honestly, I just selfishly want to celebrate that I'm 36 years old and debt-free, and to explain the story of how I got to this point. So sit back and relax. Today is just going to be a story of Jamie's life and some of the lessons I learned, and a lot of the small things I've just done day to day for decades to get me to this really cool point today. Because goals sometimes start the silliest way. I didn't always have this goal of paying off my house before I turned 40, but it got planted in my brain a while ago because of a chance conversation my husband told me about. So we both grew up in a small town in Wyoming, and there was a conversation he heard a well-to-do family talking with his family about. And one day he heard them say something like, "Hey, we paid off our house before we turned 40. Like, woohoo! That's so cool." And this family I know them, they're well-to-do, and something about that specific goal of not only being a homeowner, but having your house paid off before you turned 40, it just lodged in my brain, and I've never been able to forget that. And suddenly, after hearing that conversation, it became my goal. And suddenly I was no longer happy to be a homeowner, but I wanted to be a homeowner who paid off my house before I turned 40 years old. That just felt like a really cool goal, and it felt like something that was achievable that I could do. So growing up, my dad taught me to be wise with money. And back in the 90s, when I was 8 or 10 years old, he gave me a weekly allowance for doing chores. And with each dollar that I earned, he put them into 3 different mason jars. Yes, this was the 90s, and we were paid with cash. And there was 3 mason jars. One of them was to pay God. One was to pay myself to spend on whatever I wanted as an 8-year-old. And the other was to save for the future. And it wasn't anything big particularly, but just money that I was putting in the bank that I couldn't touch now, that I would save either for a bike or something big that would take some saving. And so every week he and I would meet in the basement, and he would pay me the cash for the chores I'd done that week, and I would choose how to allocate it. The only one being non-negotiable was to pay God 10% first. Then the other 2, I could do whatever I wanted. But my dad was smart, and he sweetened the pot, and he said, "Jamie, for every $1 that you put into savings, I'm going to double that, and we'll deposit it in the bank. So if you put $10 in the bank, I'll put $10 too. You'll have $20. And I'm a smart cookie, and I love money. And so kind of from the beginning, I just wanted to save my money to make it grow. And he helped me visualize that and see how I could grow it more quickly by putting it in the bank and not spending it on all the penny candy at the gas station that I love to walk to and get with my sister and with my friends. He taught me to start saving early and to not spend all my money right out of the gate. And even something as simple as just having a bank account as, I don't know, I was 8 or 10 years old, and I had my own bank account, my own little debit card. And I guess starting out like that, control of my finances and to have money in a bank account helped me long-term to value money and to consider saving it and not to spend it all right out of the gate. And since then, I've kind of caught the bug for saving money, and I haven't stopped since. And so I've intentionally made life choices to set myself up for financial success usually at the expense of a lot of immediate gratification. It needs to be said that I missed out on a lot of things by saving a lot for the future and making decisions that changed the trajectory of my future. So I want to share a couple of them with you. So the first one was I went to school at the University of Wyoming. That's where I chose to go to college. Back in 2004, it was one of the least expensive programs in the country. And I intentionally wanted to take on the smallest loan debt possible because I knew I was going to be a mom someday, and I did not want to have to work full-time for a couple decades because of those student loan payments. If I wanted to work full-time, that would be fine, but I didn't want to feel like I had to work and balance motherhood if I didn't want to. So that was a big part of the reason why I went to pharmacy school at the University of Wyoming. And my friends all went to other schools. And even as a pharmacist, when I was working with interns in Utah, I would tell them, like, go to University of Wyoming. Like, I'm so glad you're going to pharmacy school. Consider University of Wyoming because it's such a lower tuition. Like, go somewhere with a low tuition. And my friends back then, and even new little PharmD acceptance students, all said the same thing. Like, do you know how much I'm going to get paid when I get out? I'll be able to afford this, no problem. I am not going to school in cold, windy Laramie, Wyoming. It's not worth it for me. I don't want to live there. I don't want to be away from my family. And I'm going to make so much when I get out that it doesn't really matter. For me, getting a quality education at a great price was worth it. Sure, I lived in a very cold, very barren place for 6 years. But when I graduated, I didn't have 6 figures of student debt, and that was instantly worth it to me to not have that big debt over my head as a fresh grad coming out of school. And secondly, when I was in college, I really made it work for me. So if you're in college, I hope you're making it work for you too, because I did a couple things that took a lot of time, but ultimately taught me some cool leadership positions and saved me a lot of money. So I made college work for me by being very active in student government and spending my time as a leader of the university's Resident Halls Association. Because when you're the president or vice president of the Resident Halls Association, you get free room and board, which for me included like an all-access pass to the cafeteria. And I was a very hungry college student, and still am now. Feel like a very hungry college student. And I ate a lot of food. And so it was a slam dunk for me to save all of that money in room and board by serving as the Resident Halls vice president and helping run that organization. I saved so much money that way. And that on top of applying for all of the scholarships and being involved in all the programs, I was able to graduate with my PharmD with only $24,000 in student debt. And that moves on to the next point. I lived like a college student for years after graduation. As soon as I graduated, I started making bank. I was earning like $130,000 a year as a 24-year-old PharmD working in retail pharmacy. However, I kept my spending the same as when I was in college. I funneled all of my new money into 3 places: to paying off my student loans so I could pay them off within 6 months, before interest started kicking in, because I don't want to pay interest on that thing, by fully funding my employer's 401k plan and getting their match for it and maxing out my contribution and saving up for a house down payment. Because I was so used to being poor that it was easy to live the same as I had as a college student for a few years. If you keep your expenses low and you keep living like a college student, then you honestly don't know what you're missing by jumping into living as much as your lifestyle is giving you. Or I guess living a lifestyle as much as your income is giving you, because this kind of sounds so dumb, but like it even took my husband and I a while to start buying nice things to eat, like cheese, and for example, like we were college students living on like beans and tortillas and oatmeal and just the cheapest food possible. And so buying cheese to put on our bean burritos felt like a luxury and was something we were both kind of had a hard time starting to buy again. So we're like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. How does anyone afford cheese? Anyway, that's kind of a silly example, but just living like a college student for a long time allows you to have more disposable income and to put it into buckets that allow you to hit those goals faster than just spending it on upgrades in life that, while they may give you temporary pleasure, ultimately keep you tied into high living expenses. And So for a couple of years, we saved for the down payment of our house. And when we went to buy a house, we bought a very small house that was way under what the bank would lend me. Because once my husband and I had saved enough for a down payment, we went house hunting. And with my pharmacist salary and my husband's new accounting position, the bank wanted to give us a lot of money for the house. But we did not want much money. We just wanted a house for a family with a big yard that wouldn't stretch our budget. So we bought the smallest house in a neighborhood that we loved. And we've happily lived there ever since. And the thing is, it wasn't a new fancy build with Instagram-worthy pictures. It's a regular house that's it was, I think, 25 years old when we bought it. And it was just perfect for us. All of my friends were buying brand new houses that looked really nice. And we bought intentionally an older house that we loved that did have some work to do, but we could put it in and make it our own and not break the bank with that mortgage payment every month. The next thing that we did when we bought this house that was super small and didn't eat up all of our monthly income was that we paid for pretty much everything we could in cash. Now, I don't actually mean cold hard cash with like envelopes of cash, but with a credit card whose balance was paid off in full at the end of every month. We have a fund for big purchases like cars that we pay into each month and like prepay for things like a car ahead of time so that once we have that bucket of money for a car saved up, then we can just pay it all up front in cash. And let me tell you, living this life, we have not had fancy cars. In fact, for a long time, we only had one car. We shared one car between my husband and I, and it was a 2001 Hyundai Accent that had a stick shift. It had roll down windows. You remember those? Like, there's not automatic windows. They're roll down windows. It only had a tape player and there was no clock. Like, it wasn't even fancy enough to have a clock. It was like the most basic car you could imagine on planet Earth. And we drove that thing for more than 10 years and drove it into the ground until it died and could not come anymore before we bought a new car. We just got in the habit of not accruing extra debt and not having things that were particularly nice and fancy. We had something that would get the job done, and we loved that thing and honored it for getting us where we needed to go and like appreciating the service it gave for us. But I'm not kidding when I say like living well below your means. You would have laughed at that car, but it was our car and we loved it so much. And it was actually kind of ridiculous because, so it's a two front seat car and then like the back row, but there was only 2 doors on it. So at one point we had 3 kids and we had to drop them off at daycare. My husband had like 3 car seats to cram in the back of this 2-door car. And it took like this intricate shuffle and like breaking your hand by reaching in there to like buckle the baby's car seat. And it was totally ridiculous. And I think most people would have said, like, okay, this is enough. We're just upgrading and buying an SUV for our growing family. And we're like, no, we are making this work. And we made it work. And the children were very squished in the back seat. But for a couple years, it worked. And we just made things work scrappy because we valued future money more than the comfort of today, even doing silly things like cramming 3 kids in the back of a very tiny car. Also, fun fact, if you have a really tiny, junky car, people don't ask you for rides very much. So when it was my husband's work car, so when he would go out with people to lunch, they would always volunteer to drive because his car was like so little and tight and cramped that like you get out of giving a lot of rides when you have a small car. So we paid for everything in cash, lived like way below our means, and also had this fine balance of saving versus investing. Because I know that like you can save your way to financial freedom, but you also have to consider the flip coin of investing and how investments will grow over time, because compound interest is what, the 8th wonder of a world. And I've always wanted compound interest to work for me instead of against me in the form of like student loans and a mortgage. And so also from day one of being an adult and like adulting with a real W-2 job that had a 401k, we have balanced paying off that mortgage and actually paying our future selves. And so it actually, like, I had to resist my gut impulse to just pay everything off as fast as humanly possible and throw all cash towards debt. Because I know by doing that, I'd miss out on the beauty of interest rates working for me long into the future. So we've always paid our future selves first and maxed out our retirement accounts before making additional payments on our house. And I'm really glad I did that now, because now those accounts are over $1 million and they're still growing for me day and night, all the time. And the earlier you start those retirement accounts and start to invest, the longer that curve can grow and the way more you can make into the future. I should do a whole episode on investing, how investing at different ages, like how it changes the amount of money you'll have in the future, because it's fascinating to me. And so investing in my future first was more important than paying off all debt, because yes, it's fun to be debt-free, but I would rather be debt-free with a very nice nest egg. I'd rather have a very nice nest egg with some debt than being like so debt-free, house rich and cash poor. Anyway, I'll talk more about that in a second. But the next thing that I've been doing was I just ignored my seemingly independent, wealthy friends and just lived like I wanted to live. I was the only one at Walgreens who brought a PB&J sandwich to work every day. Everyone else ate out most of the shifts. I'll always remember the first pharmacy I worked at, it was me and 3 techs every day. Every single meal, they would eat out, and they're spending like $10 or $20 eating out. And I know how much techs are getting paid, and apparently they're independently wealthy, and I'm not. And just watching like them burn all their money and not choosing to do the same, whether they're tech, a pharmacist, people in my neighborhood, I just do things differently than most people and kind of ignore what all of my friends who live like they're independently wealthy do. For example, I don't take my kids to Disneyland 3 times a year like it seems like everyone else in Utah does. In fact, my kids still haven't been to Disneyland. We don't go on amazing luxury cruises as a family. We don't drive a Land Rover Range Rover. You heard about our old car. We don't eat out very much as a family. The decor in my home does not look straight out of Pinterest. My kids don't have expensive lessons doing a million sports. Heck, my kids don't even wear brand name clothes. I'm not trying to keep up with anyone. I honestly don't care how others live. I just want time and financial freedom for my family. That's all I want. So just by ignoring the Joneses and not trying to keep up with them has made it easier to stick to my goals. And lastly, having 6 months of living expenses on hand has really been helpful, because having a 6-month minimum cushion of all living expenses has brought a lot of peace of mind and allowed us to live not in a reactionary state. So knowing that if my husband and I lost all income today, we could live just fine for at least 6 months. And to have that financial cushion has been really helpful because life happens. Accidents happen, car wrecks happen, house stuff has to be fixed. And having the basics of life met before they happen really helped us get out of debt quickly and stay out of debt in the long term. Because when you prepare ahead and have a cushion for yourself, you can withstand blows far, far easier than someone living paycheck to paycheck who desperately needs every penny to pay for existing bills, let alone an unexpected expense that will come up, because that's real life. In short, this has been a wild journey, and one for years that honestly I felt like I was missing out on, like watching my friends on Instagram living this beautiful, amazing life, and it seemed to be like flowing with money. And here I was like saving my money and investing in my retirement and paying off my house. I didn't regret my decisions, but it felt like I was missing out a lot. But now that I've come on the other side of paying off my last mortgage payment and being completely debt-free as a 36-year-old, I feel really free and happy. And I want to spend the last few minutes addressing some parts of achieving this goal that are like part of the messy real life, because I'm not some like FIRE, if you've heard of that term, FIRE, like financially independent, retire early, single girl who's living in my parents' basement and can do this because I have no dependents. No way. Here's the real life behind what running our household is like and what it feels like in real life to live this path. So we have 4 boys. I have 4 boys. This year, they're ages 5, 7, 9, and 11. They eat a lot. Our grocery bill is very expensive every month. Paying for childcare this whole time has been no joke. And we've been funding each of their 529 accounts since they were born. So to like take care of kids, raise kids, and get them to set up for at least a decent start to life with a 529 account has made this journey a lot slower for us than some of my friends who are single or they're just married with no kids, living with kids. It's like a whole different ballgame. But it's also my reason for wanting to do this so much because I have kids and I want my time to be with them. And I want to show them that you can do really cool things and you can achieve awesome financial goals. I want to be that example for them so that they can make their own choices in life, but they can see an example of frugality and how it ultimately really opens the door for a pretty sweet future. Secondly, we added a significant expense to our mortgage when we more than doubled our mortgage by doubling the size of our home with new construction 5 years ago. That cute, sweet little house that we bought back in 2011 when I was pregnant with my first child was squeezing us out because we had 3 bedrooms and we were out of space. But we didn't want to leave our house with a really big lot, and we didn't want to buy an expensive new house. So we just added on to it while we lived through construction and had baby number 4 during the same time, which in itself is its own show episode because that was no small joke. So we actually set ourselves way back by doubling our mortgage, but ultimately we live in the house of our dreams. So now we're going to really stay forever. And lastly, we just had some really big house expenses along the way, like getting solar panels, replacing the entire HVAC, getting tree work done with all of these big, amazing, mature trees we have in our yard. Redoing our landscaping post-construction was not cheap. And redoing the kitchen along the way after construction was done. And, buying cars and health insurance and paying for life has to be part of your formulaic process. The thing I want you to know from this is with a single goal in mind, I've been able to climb a mountain. And it only took about 20 years of good life choices to get to this point. But looking back, I do all those choices again in a heartbeat because right now I'm utterly free. Sure, I have to pay for food for boys who eat like the locust plagues of Egypt, but if that's my biggest monthly expense, then I'm in good shape. And there's just this certain feeling of peace knowing that I'll never be homeless. No matter how bad it gets, I can camp out in my house, living off of ramen noodles. This freedom will allow me to personally and professionally pursue what I'm interested in rather than just what makes ends meet. 20 years of living below my means that now I get to live like a king. I'm sharing this story with you for encouragement to play the long game too. Invest in your future and don't be discouraged if it takes years or decades to hit your goals. Because that's real life. And I believe that's the only true shortcut in life is to play the long game, do the hard work, and have consistent daily habits that start a domino effect of more good daily consistent habits. I hope this story has been interesting for you and given you encouragement to think long term and to invest long term in yourself, that no one's an overnight success. That's not real life, especially when you have kids and a family and just the messiness of real life. Planning long term and having the patience long term, even when other people around you are having a lot of immediate gratification right now, investing in the long term and doing the hard things that most people aren't willing to do pays off some sweet, sweet rewards. And truly, playing the long game really is the only shortcut in life.